for the Santa Monica Rent Control Board. This forum is being co-sponsored by Committee for Racial Justice, CRJ, and the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund, or the League. Both co-sponsors are nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations and never support or oppose candidates for public office. My name is Karen Gunn, and I will be your moderator for this forum. As you probably know, this year, all registered California voters will automatically receive a vote by mail ballot in early October, and voters are being encouraged to return their ballots early to make sure they will be received by the registrar's office in time to be counted. For these reasons, we have committed to holding our forums earlier this year. We want you, our voters, to have the opportunity to hear from our local candidates by early October. This year, we have 2 open seats for 4-year terms each. We have invited all 4 qualified candidates to participate in tonight's forum. We're pleased to say that all 4 have accepted and will be participating. Each candidate participating in tonight's forum will have the opportunity to answer a variety of questions related to the overarching theme of transformation in the era of Black Lives Matter, with a maximum of 1 minute for each response. Because we will be asking questions that we want candidates to have time to understand and think about before answering, the co-sponsors sent a list of questions to all Rent Control Board candidates in advance. The questions we ask tonight are drawn from that list. The candidates do not know which ones we will choose for them. Questions have been gathered in advance from the co-sponsoring organizations and through community outreach, and will be asked in random order according to a blind matrix created by the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund. Timing this evening will be done by Sharon Hart of the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund. She is represented by the timer that you see on your screen. It is a countdown timer. There's a person behind it, and you will see it go from 60 seconds to 0 for each question. All candidates participating in tonight's forum have signed a confirmation form committing to standards of civility and courtesy, helping to maintain an atmosphere of respect and tolerance throughout the forum. We do thank them for that agreement. A note about tonight's process. Because we have only 4 candidates for Rent Control Board, each question will be answered by all 4. So we're going to have them occur in what we call rounds. So let's get started, the first round. So for all the candidates here, we'd like the participants to get to know all of you. So as I call your name, please tell us who you are and why you're running for the Rent Control Board. You each will have 1 minute to answer. I'm going to start with Mrs. Foster, Anastasia.
Hi, good evening, and thank you to the League and the Committee for Racial Justice for having this wonderful forum. It's so necessary. My name is Anastasia Foster. I am a mom, I'm a renter, I'm a 14, almost 15-year resident of Santa Monica, and my work on the Rent Board started through my work at Meals on Wheels West, where I'm now a sitting board member. But back then I was a driver, and I was confronted by some really truly harrowing conditions in the apartments of a lot of my clients. And as I tried to advocate for them with their property managers or landlords, I was really, in a few cases, truly disappointed at the responses I received. And I started to learn more about their rights on their behalf, which led me to 2 years of work and advocacy at Santa Monicans for Renters' Rights on the tenant hotline and on housing committee there and other places in that organization. And then that led me to my work on the Rent Control Board. And as we only serve 2 terms on the Rent Control Board, just asking for 1 more to continue doing the good work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mr. Cornavette, make sure to unmute yourself. Thank
Good
you.
evening. My name is Robert Kronevet. I've been a resident of Santa Monica for 32 years. My children all went to Santa Monica High School, and I want to set the record straight. Kronevet and our business model, and we served from 2008 to 2012. This campaign is not about removing residents from their home. This campaign is about bringing the taxpayer a system that provides solutions. Housing across time and across Memorial is a very sacred and profound change in people's lives. We believe deeply that every resident in Santa Monica, and quite frankly across the country, should be able to enjoy their home without fear of losing it. We have a lot of subjects to talk about. I'm thrilled to participate with these very important conversations. Thank you for your inviting me.
Thank you. And last but not least, Carolyn Torosis.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn, and thank you to the Committee on Racial Justice and the League of Women Voters for having us tonight. My name is Carolyn Torosis, and I'm running for re-election to the Rent Control Board because I believe that protecting renters' rights protects the integrity of our community. I believe that together we can build a more inclusive, more just county, state, and country where all people receive equitable treatment under the law, where honest work equates to fair pay, and where every person has the ability to achieve economic mobility. As a first-generation American, my parents have always instilled in me the importance of seeing all people through the same lens, no matter their background, their personal history, their ownership, their rental status. I bring these values to every decision I make, and I have dedicated my life to public service, from representing low-wage workers in cases of wage theft to tenants in their power imbalance relationships with landlords. With Anastasia Foster, I have spent the last 4 years on the board ensuring that tenants and landlords are entitled to fair and reasonable rent controls. We've expanded relocation benefits for tenants. We've ensured that units can only be rented to natural persons, and we've eliminated unfair pass-through fees. Now, in the wake of COVID-19 and our impending eviction moratorium being lifted, it is important that we...
Thank you. Thank you. As you can see, our timer is going to actually mute you after a few minutes. We'll allow you to finish your sentence, but thank you so much. I'd like to turn to our next question, which is on the minds of many in our community. It is as follows. What role can the Rent Control Board play to help deal with the coming wave of evictions in Santa Monica when the eviction moratorium and rental assistance programs expire? I'm going to start this round by turning first to Mr. Kronevet. Make sure you unmute.
Yes, ma'am. This is a really crucial question that needs to be addressed in a sober manner. Nobody wants to be evicted from their home, and no property manager and no owner wants units to be vacant. There are several solutions that can be achieved. A, we work out a schedule of payments, which is very, very difficult. B, we begin to introduce something called a tenant equity project, which over time allows tenants in the unit to enjoy the equity growth given time in their unit. Mathematically, if a property increases by $1 million in 5 years, each tenant can enjoy a small percentage of that. And the idea to avoid evictions right now in this strange, crazy time is to work with your housing provider. The housing provider has tremendous pressures as well. Will the state of California and the counties waive the property tax fee? More to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Next, Ms. Torosis.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn. I believe that this is a multi-pronged solution. The Rent Control Board must work with City Council, and moreover, we must work with our lobbyists in Sacramento at the state level and at the federal level. We know that we need to fight for additional federal funding to provide a stopgap for renters who cannot pay rent, for landlords who are not receiving their monthly rent. And I believe that we would be able to work with City Council to get delegated authority to advise on the dissemination of funds from the federal level to make sure that our most vulnerable renters and tenants are protected first. Additionally, I believe that we need to strengthen the Preserve Our Diversity program as we work to provide a stopgap for the coming wave of evictions. We need to target our most vulnerable renters first. And we absolutely, like Mr. Kronovitz said, need to launch a robust education and outreach campaign so that tenants and renters are able to understand what their rights are and how to get connected to a repayment plan.
Thank you. And Mrs. Foster.
Yeah, and Carolyn covered a lot of it. In her work at the county, she's already immersed in a lot of this work. And as part of what I see my role as being as an elected official in Santa Monica is to go beyond Santa Monica, to take this community's good name and good credit and go elsewhere. I work with the Right to Counsel Coalition throughout Los Angeles County, for instance. I bring the Santa Monica perspective to that coalition to work on what happens for representation with these tenants. And already, as part of the work on right to counsel in general for tenants in this region, that has already lent itself to some of the details of what kinds of policies will be implemented once this crisis is out there in the open. Also, Santa Monica specifically, we work directly with council members to advise them on policies to extend the moratoriums that we can on no-fault evictions that have nothing to do with repayment of rent. So that's something we can do.
Thank you very much. I'd like to move to the next question. How can we protect our neighborhoods from gentrification? And I'm going to begin this one with Ms. Terosas.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn. Well, first, we need to make sure that we preserve and expand rent control. We need to make sure that we're increasing our access not only to rent-controlled housing, but to deed-restricted affordable housing. We need to make sure that people who have invested in our community and who have been long-term tenants have the dignity to age in place. And we need to make sure that there is a diversity of ideas and cultures and voters in Santa Monica. So in order to do that, I really feel that we should consider adopting potentially a vacancy or anti-speculation tax to stem the tide of displacement. So City of LA has considered a vacancy tax and deferred it to the 2022 election. Oakland and Vancouver have already done this to make sure that we're not holding units off of the market, especially in situations where we have luxury units in downtown LA, for example. We have a 14% vacancy rate there. We need to make sure that we are putting our units in a more affordable position to people who can rent them. In addition, we need to disincentivize speculation and high turnover of our developed properties and of our units.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to pay attention to the time. Mrs. Foster.
Yeah, and again, those were some. I echo those points. Those were some fantastic policy suggestions. So I don't want to be repetitive of what Carolyn already said. There's some other ideas. When you're talking about anti-gentrification, we need to make people feel welcome in their community, feel acknowledged and seen in their community. We need to do that through. The city needs to explore loan programs and support for Black-owned businesses, Black and brown families who operate companies and small businesses in this town, through creative and cultural activities. We have these wonderful ideas for food bazaars and things that are very inclusive of other cultures and make people feel welcome through our arts and our cultures in this city as well. I'm absolutely for a vacancy tax. It didn't necessarily make sense in the wake of, in the immediate moment of this crisis, but going forward, not only to raise money for affordable housing, but to incentivize reasonable rent prices on existing units that are not rented today.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kronovitz.
I don't share my opponent's view, if I may, regarding the rights of tenants are superior to owners. I believe gentrification is appropriate and proper. It's also an avenue for tenants, or we call customers, to move into home ownership. Isn't that a wonderful idea? For those who have rented, which we tried to do years ago in Torca, but my opponents were not in favor of moving tenants into ownership, which I am. So gentrification is not a bad thing. It is actually a natural order of things. And as Victor Hugo said, all the armies in the world cannot stop an idea as time has come. So progress marches on. I do not believe an additional burden on the homeowner or the property owner. They are burdened enough. I do believe deeply that moving from tenancy to ownership is appropriate, fitting, and I stand for that.
Thank you very much. Let me move to the next question, and it's about a proposition that will appear on our November ballot. Do you support Proposition 21, which is parenthetically referred to as rent control affordability? The first person for that is Mr. Cronovet.
Okay, this is a very, very important topic. I do not support 21. It's outrageous. Let's go over the acoustics of what rent control does. In real estate, the owner has a bundle of rights to rent, to finance, to live in, to build. What 21 does is it reinstates one of the uglier aspects of rent control, which is vacancy control. There's no secret that my opponents are desperate to maintain their voting stock, but crushing owners and draconian methods to keep owners down and get more and more burden on the property owner is not appropriate. We cannot help poor folks by tearing down the rich. Essentially, what you will have again is key for money, enormous corruption, and a control of units without any motivation to fix them up and enjoy better lifestyles. My opponents have seen the dilapidated properties. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mrs. Foster.
Yes, I absolutely support Prop 21, and here's why. We had 19 years of what you might call strict rent control, where vacancies prices were controlled once a tenant moved out. They only moved up the amount that the law allowed for the next tenant. Now we've had the state legislators in Sacramento decided that had had its time, and for their own reasons switched gears to vacancy decontrol. And for 21 years, we have had vacancy decontrol, which has taken many of our empty apartments out of the reach of anyone who doesn't make below 120 grand a year. And that does not represent the equity or the values of this community. What Prop 21 would do would be let every individual community up and down the state first decide whether they need it or not, and to what degree. In Santa Monica, we've already opined that we would look for probably 2 different categories of rent increases. And I think I'll let my colleague Kristen or Carolyn talk about that.
Thank you. So let me then turn to Ms. DeRosas.
Thank you. So of course, I absolutely do support Proposition 21 as a replacement to Costa-Hawkins. I do want to echo what Ms. Foster said. This is allowing local governments more local control to enact the appropriate rent controls that make sense for their jurisdiction. It is not forcing anyone to enact vacancy control. Additionally, it would allow us more flexibility to enact rent control on housing first occupied 15 years ago. Right now, we cannot expand our rent controlled housing stock given Costa-Hawkins. And we know that since Costa-Hawkins has been in effect, we've seen close to 5% rent increases year over year, compounding our affordability crisis in this city. Additionally, over 70% of the people living in the city are renters. So I feel it is very important to protect the integrity, the diversity, the rental housing stock of our city to make sure that individuals are entitled to fair and habitable premises. Now, we also know that since vacancy decontrol came into effect, most of our long-term tenants have left Santa Monica and most of our units are at market rate. And so I would strongly.
Thank you. I hope we got most of what you were saying. Let me move on to the next question, which has to do with the work of the Rent Control Board in the current and changing environment. Are you anticipating any transformations in the Rent Board's approach to its work in this era of Black Lives Matter? And I'm going to begin with Mrs. Foster.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question that a community like ours is going to respond and respond strongly. The good news is that at the Rent Board, we have already been paying a lot of attention to this. All of our colleagues on the board, especially Carolyn and myself, have led the way on tasking our staff with an expansion of data collection so that we can be better informed as to how our regulations, which is the legislative function of our body, can best help the members of our community. And the mission of the charter is to preserve existing tenancies and preserve rental housing stock. So that is what we are tasked with. And so everything we do going forward with that equity lens, from repealing Prop 209, we're using our advocacy through our agency's lobbyists in Sacramento to help repeal Prop 209 and to educate the voting public on what that is, and to support Prop 21. All of these things can help keep our Black and brown families in place.
Thank you very much. And I'll turn now to Ms. Torosis.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn. So as Anastasia mentioned, we actually already called for an equity study to look at who's coming to our agency, how are we serving them, and what are the outcomes vis-a-vis, their white counterparts, women, different minority groups, et cetera. And like Anastasia mentioned, we're actually undertaking an unprecedented data transformation and having more transparency for our public on how we serve them and hear different cases. Additionally, should Prop 209 pass in the November election, or should we repeal Prop 209 in the November election, I would be very in favor of working with our landlords to give them some sort of incentive to offer a first right of refusal on new units to those people of color and tenants of color who have been historically displaced from our city. Additionally, looking at the Preserve Our Diversity program to see if we can expand that for Black tenants and families of color to ensure that we're promoting greater diversity in our community. I'm disappointed that only 4.5% of our community is Black. That speaks to the equitable nature of accessing Santa Monica, and we need to prioritize rental housing for historically displaced families.
Thank you so much. Mr. Kronavet.
This is a very touchy question, but I'm going to be very direct because I believe the residents and the voters are entitled to it. I'm in the real estate business, and every single dollar is green. I'm also obligated to do the licenses on the wall to follow the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and its rise in 67. We are not permitted under any law, state law, federal law, or municipal law, to take any race into any sort of criteria regarding rental or sales of housing. This is no small matter. On the other hand, there's no question that African-American men and women and other minorities in America have been very damaged by nasty and ugly Jim Crow laws, specifically the one that accelerated foreclosures on different families that were not equitably treated by the mortgage industry. This is a disgrace. More to come.
Thank you very much. Let me move on because now we'd like to turn to what your priorities are. So the next question, what is your top priority in the next 4 years as a rent control board member? And how do you envision Santa Monica in the future? I'm going to begin with Mr. Kronavet.
Well, thank you. You can see us politicians love to talk. The idea, again, is to move tenants into ownership. Now, you can say, Kronavet, we can't. My grandparents rented in New York for 50 years. I understand that. But in the essence of it, my opponents don't believe in that. I believe the natural order is ownership. And I believe the dignity and the salvation of our nation is through home ownership or the movement towards it. So A, we'll introduce the tenant equity project that allows tenants to enjoy the growth so they feel some ownership. B, we need to educate young men and women in high school what it means to fill a credit app out, what a rental looks like, what financial responsibility looks like. C, we need to be very serious about parking solutions for all our residents. And down the road, improvements in lighting, in automatic systems that provide the tenants better services. More to come.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Ms. Torosis.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn. In my next term, I'm very focused on improving tenant protections in the wake of COVID-19. I think that this is important to prevent a massive wave of evictions and increasing homelessness in our community. I'm hoping that we will be able to accomplish the repeal of Costa-Hawkins through Proposition 21, as we are on the brink of our eviction crisis and potential demolition derby of many of our rent-controlled housing units in Santa Monica. And I'm committed to greater equity in how our agency delivers services and crafts policy. Specifically, I want to look at asking for common sense changes to post-Ellis Act uses of our rent-controlled housing stock, including a one-for-one replacement of units lost. And additionally, I want to work more closely with our city attorney and our city council to investigate and potentially enforce cases of tenant harassment by increasing our penalties for such cases, as we've seen increasing tenant harassment at our agency. And we need to stem the tide of and be proactive to prevent the patterns that we are seeing emerge.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Foster.
Yeah, a huge focus for me on preventing harassment. This is through new emerging trends where we've been seeing for several years in construction-related harassment, buyout-related harassment. And I helped author and pen the tenant information sheet that every single rent-controlled tenant in Santa Monica is now required to have, both from the landlord and from the agency. Knowledge is power, and it's just the stories that I have witnessed personally in my years of advocacy in this community just shouldn't happen. They shouldn't happen. And so we need to do what Carolyn said. We need to work with our city attorney office, and we need to look at increasing penalties as a deterrent, and to doing whatever it takes to preserve all of our families and our individuals who have made huge contributions to this community, have their children in our schools, to be able to stay here in quiet enjoyment of their rented home.
Thank you so much. So we're going to continue with some other questions that have to do with the Rent Control Board itself. The next question, do you think the Rent Control Board reflects the diversity of the city? If not, how do you propose diversifying this board? And I'm going to begin this with Mrs. Foster.
Well, sure. And I absolutely think we need more and ever increasing diversity across our city as a whole and across every level of government, from our boards and commissions, from our local charities, all the way up through our elected positions. There's no question we need more and more than we have. I am thrilled that there are 4 women out of 5 positions on the Rent Control Board currently, but we can't do enough. And part of our job in our last term that will, if we are to earn it here on the rent board, is preserving tenancies. If we can't keep the families we have in place, we're going to lose some of the people who have the most to contribute to our boards and commissions and elected offices. So yes, I'm all for continuing to strive to diversify this board and all the others in the future.
Thank you. Ms. Terosas.
Thank you. And of course, I echo the sentiments by Ms. Foster. I am committed to diversity at all levels of government. Not only am I working on the Rent Control Board every day, but working for the citizens of the County of Los Angeles to ensure that we are investing in the most historically underinvested areas. I think that we need greater diversity at all levels of city, county, state, and federal government. I'm involved with several organizations that commit to training up women and people of color for such seats. And I think we can definitely do more to ensure that our Rent Control Board is reflective of the diversity of the city. That includes succession planning. Again, we only have 2 terms on this board, making sure that we're bringing other people of color, women, younger individuals, older individuals, all different diverse individuals onto the Rent Control Board who are interested. And that involves being aware and involved in our wonderful boards and commissions that our city council has as well. I think making sure that we're getting a diverse group of people involved in our government.
Thank you so much. Mr. Cronovette.
It's fascinating to hear my opponents talk about diversity on the rent board. There is no diversity. It's 100% Santa Monica renters' rights. There's no homeowner representation. There's no property management representation. I represent that position. The diversity you're seeking is an illusion. The diversity we are looking for is moving people from tenancy into homeownership. When you make these draconian handcuffs on owners, you create a very hostile market, which we've experienced. We all want diversity, but at the end of the day, we're in the real estate business on the Rent Control Board. We need to find solutions that are appropriate and balanced so the consumer and this provider, or in simpler economic terms, I do not recognize a conflict in the supply and demand of the housing industry that my opponents promoted. More to come.
Thank you so much. It looks like we have time for two more questions. So the next question, what do you see as the path for preserving low-income rental housing in Santa Monica? And I'm going to begin this with Ms. Terosas.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn. I believe, so the question was, how do we preserve low-income rental housing? And so I just want to be very clear that there's rent-controlled housing stock and then there's deed-restricted affordable housing. I believe that we need to preserve both types of quote low-income housing in order to address the Rent Control Board and the Rent Control Board's role in the affordable housing crisis. We must focus on preservation of our existing rent-controlled housing stock. We must try to bring additional rent-controlled housing stock back to the market, and we also must preserve our existing tenancies. Additionally, I believe that we need to look at other ways to generate revenue for our Affordable Housing Trust Fund so that we can expand and increase funding for the Preserve Our Diversity program in order to keep our long-term tenants in their housing. We know that Santa Monica has a rent burden rate of almost 50%, which means that 50% of Santa Monicans are spending over a third of their income on housing. We have to protect those who are most vulnerable and work with City Council to do so.
Thank you. Mr. Kronavet.
Thank you. This is a very important conversation. I personally find that the label of low income and affordable housing is racist, discriminatory, and you pigeonhole people. Where do you live, Johnny? I live in a low income housing. Sarah, where do you live? I live in affordable housing. That's outrageous. Each individual at the moment of their housing is doing the best they can. But to label people and to be proud of it, we know why. Our opponents at Santa Monica Renters' Rights are desperate to get every single vote. So you put people in low-income housing, you put people in affordable housing, and you cripple them from moving up. To be very, very clear, real estate has been the pathway for upward mobility in this nation. We have fought feudalism. Adam and Eve got kicked out of the Garden of Eden. We have fought thousands of years of controlling and destroying homeownership. Low-income housing is exactly opposite. More to come.
Thank you so much. Mrs. Foster.
I see a wonderful dignity in a community that is willing to spend the time, resources, and considerable passion and intelligence of its population to further equity and to protect families and individuals in this city. And a roof over one's head is the most important thing. And would homeownership be great for all of us? Sure, it might. But 8 years of that under George W. Bush drove us into an irresponsible foreclosure crisis and tremendous impacts on a lot of people's credit to this day. And I don't want to focus on that. What I want to focus on is finding ideas in Sacramento for recapitalization of deed restricted affordable housing that could expire after a 55-year or 99-year deed restriction. We need to be looking at common sense and equitable approaches to expanding pod programs so that we can add families of color to those categories. Thank you.
Thank you. This is the last item, and it's actually not a question, it's a request. Without referencing the other candidates, if you could just kind of look into the screen and tell us why we should vote for you as one of our two choices for Rent Control Board. And I'm going to begin with Mr. Kronavet.
Ladies and gentlemen in Santa Monica, most of you understand the positions we have You're entitled to hear another position than my opponents, my very valuable opponents. Santa Monica is a vibrant city. My family's done well, and I want to be clear that the Rent Control Board is a highly paid, important body that has very powerful choices. And to have a completely lopsided board of 5 tenant advocates who have worked their way up by being on the phone of Santa Monica renters' rights is an illusion. I'd like to improve the parking. The tenants who know me love Cronavet because we provide services. There's electric vehicles to think about, improved lighting, public safety. And furthermore, dealing with the homeless is a state issue. We have redundant policies in this city, and somebody needs to look for your back, and that's Cronavet for Rent Board. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Mrs. Foster.
I am very proud of my time so far on the rent board and my time in this community as a mother and a renter, working with my neighbors and schools for the last 14 years to get to know tenants through my work on Meals on Wheels and driving to every corner of the city, helping our mostly elderly and disabled citizens stay in their homes. I am proud of the dignity of this work. Carolyn and I have both accomplished a lot of solid regulations and policy goals that we set out to do. We, on our own time and of our own desire to do so, have gone out into the further community because Santa Monica is not a bubble. We are part of Los Angeles, California, one of the biggest metropolitan areas in the country, and that can't be ignored. So we go out into the region, into the state, and educate and represent our community's interests far and wide. And I just ask for one last term to continue that good work. Thank you for tonight.
Thank you very much. Ms. Terosas.
Thank you, Dr. Gunn. I believe that Anastasia and I are most qualified to lead this agency in the post-COVID economy. I am a workers' rights attorney, and I currently direct the County of Los Angeles' economic recovery efforts. I develop policy to promote access to career pathways for our local residents and relief for our small community-serving businesses. I truly believe that I understand community development and equitable community development. I have worked to pass laws that protect tenants and workers and preserve our rent-controlled housing. And as a certified mediator, I have resolved hundreds of unlawful detainer cases between landlords and tenants to avoid eviction. In my last 4 years on the Rent Control Board, Anastasia and I have accomplished so much, but there's still more work to do. If elected, my plan is to immediately launch a robust education and outreach campaign to connect renters who are suffering from the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting economic hardship to resources to keep them housed, to work with our partners at the county, and to make sure we have equitable repayment plans. There's so much work here still to do in the wake of Proposition 21. I would be honored for your vote, and I believe that I would be the best suited to serve for 4 more years on our board.
Thank you so much. In closing, at this time, we'd like to thank our candidates on behalf of the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund and the Committee for Racial Justice. We do want to thank all of you for taking part in tonight's candidate forum and for stepping forward to run for office. We also want to thank Sharon Hart, our timer, and Natalia Zernitskaya, our forum tech administrator. You don't see them, but they're rocking it. This forum has been live streamed to YouTube and will be available for replay on the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica channel. For more information on both local and state elections, we encourage you to check out Voters Edge at www.votersedge.org. Voters Edge is the League of Women Voters of California nonpartisan online guide to federal, state, and local elections. When this webinar ends, please use the link that you received when you registered for the Board of Education forum. That forum will begin at 7:05. Both forums are also being live streamed to the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica YouTube channel. You do not need to register for the live stream. We also invite you to join us on Sunday, October the 4th, for our Santa Monica City Council Candidate Forum, again co-sponsored by the Committee for Racial Justice and the League of Women Voters of Santa Monica Education Fund. To find a listing of our forums and the registration links, please go to the League website at www.lwvsantamonica.org. We'd also like to thank our audience for your interest. It truly takes all of us to make a democracy work. And remember, elections are won by those who vote. Thank you and have a good evening. I appreciate you all.